Karen, Reuters, breaking views.
Yes.
Great. What's it like writing about tech right now?
It's kind of a hard moment, I would say, because everything is going down, right?
Well, this is in the public markets, though. Do you get to write about startups much?
Yeah, I do. But according to people, speculation, like the press always like to talk about negative things. And at Breaking Views at Reuters, because I write a financial column, we're trying to predict what's next, what's going to happen next. And because things are already going so negative, what else can happen? And that makes it very hard to write about.
Do you think consumers are continuing a sort of a backlash, kids overusing social media, suicides, Instagram suicides, all that kind of serious stuff? Do you think people are continuing to be down on it as a result, or are we just addicts now?
Well, I think certainly that leads to more regulation, right, which makes people nervous, and we're seeing the Digital Markets Act happening in Europe at the moment, the online safety bill in the UK that's yet to go through, but we understand that sort of it will do, which makes people nervous. And then on the gaming side, I thought it was really interesting in Meta's results this week. We were saying actually that the people stopping gaming, there was this kind of spike during the pandemic, and then everyone's kind of can do other things now.
Yeah.
So that's been part of that withdrawal from the industry.
What do you think?
Well, I think that it seems like some people are still using gaming as like a social platform, right? It's kind of asking the question right now, like, what's next for the social media? Because now we have TikTok, we have something like the Be Real, but what's going to happen next? Is it the end of social media? We will go straightly from Instagram to something that is much more interactive, like gaming. That's something that people have been asking about, right?
And then in terms of social media, obviously you've had Elon buying Twitter, and so all
big
of the
turning
speculation
point, exactly,
about what's going to happen with that, which is fascinating to watch, especially going into Twitter at a time of an advertising downturn.
Exactly.
Feels contrarian.
And I find it also very interesting that all the other platforms and tech companies are going after advertising at the moment, right? Like Netflix, Uber, everyone is going after them.
And that's a recession thing, right? Do you think? People are cutting their subscriptions.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, although it's quite interesting. You always hear Netflix say when they've got a hit, it doesn't really matter about a recession, frankly. People are still willing to, show up for it. But yes, what I thought was interesting about the Netflix, though, is in pound terms, I think the new subscription service is only £2 cheaper than the non-advertising service. And I think you've got to ask whether that will really move the dial in terms of getting more people to, sign up.
So glad you could join us. Marianne Russon from NBC News. Thanks very much for coming in. Just grab a microphone there.
Hi there. Sorry, putting a new meaning to being fashionably late.
Don't worry. What sort of things let's start, what sort of things is everybody obsessing about right now? What sort of things are you writing about most at the moment?
Our data, who's storing it, where it's going, where it's being transferred to, and what we're allowed to do with that data, what businesses will be allowed to do with it probably in the next 5 years. And obviously to me that's a lot of the conversation around tech legislation, some of which is directly about data, some of which is more about privacy or AI or cybersecurity, but has a knock-on effect about what happens to that data.
I see. What are you obsessively writing about right now?
For me, I think, Mike, you kind of started off really, like what's going to happen with Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
I mean, with his super voting rights, shareholder can't really do anything about it. But I just wondering what's next for him, right? And the other thing that I'm obsessed about is actually not directly tech. All this Middle East oil money, where is it going to go to? And last week there is like a really big conference in the Middle East happening, and lots of big VC guys like Tiger Global, SoftBank, and all sorts have attended there. So are we seeing more of the Saudi money investing in tech companies? And what's the consequences of that, right? Given that they have a track record of human rights issues.
I'm going to pick up on a point that you made, Mike, about positive stories. I think something that Times readers always love reading about when it comes to tech is like really innovative, interesting businesses doing cool stuff. So I reported on a business recently that was printing proteins, like physically from a sort of desktop printer, a spin out of Cambridge University. And for me, that's what I get very excited about, and is, I would say, the most fun bit. You probably find the same, right? The most fun bit of covering tech is all of those really cool, interesting businesses doing amazing things and changing the world.
There is always like that upbeat story, isn't it, to some extent, especially in broadcast as well. You know, the crazy new thing that's going to change the world. Do we get kind of too much of a bad press ourselves about being too negative sometimes, or do people? Is it all about what people, readers and commentators tend to pick and choose what they criticise the tech press for, don't they?
I think there's an element in journalism, I'm afraid, of people like reading about what they'd like to share down the pub. And often those interesting stories can be a bit negative, but I actually think the joy of tech journalism is that they're not always, because you can always talk about something that's cool and interesting. Yeah. Perhaps more so than in other sectors.
Yeah. Do you, what about you? What do you think? Do you think that we get too much of a bad rap sometimes in the media, or do we deserve it?
I kind of agree with Katie's point. Like, I mean, the technology, the coverage that we can cover sometimes can be really positive, like the current climate tech, like upcoming climate tech issues. I mean, with the Ukraine crisis going on, for example, the shortages of grains. I was in San Francisco 2 weeks ago, hearing some kind of tech startup talking about how they can help grow grains in a different way using different kind of technology. I think this is something that we like to feel in positivity against the backdrop right now.
Okay. And
in terms of a bad press, I suppose it depends what type of press.
Yeah.
I largely think that tech journalists are doing their jobs. I think something is to be required from some mainstream journalists, probably even ourselves. I think we need to be very careful not to just take a baseball bat and stand outside the tech giants' doors and hit the baseball bat against the front doors and say, you're doing something bad. I think we need to learn more about the technology before we can really assess that.
I must admit, I do enjoy it when I get rung up by Piers Morgan's team to go and contact or some, Good Morning Britain or whatever to talk about tech. It's usually a bad story, I must admit.
It's always very dumb.
It's always a bad one. It's always a bad one. Mike, why is Twitter so bad? Anyway, thank you so much to our journalists, everybody, for coming to the Europas Awards.